Hi, welcome to Pay It Forward everybody. Today I have a brand new free pattern for you and it is a lovely fairy toadstool house. So much fun with so much colour. I got totally absorbed in this and I'm very excited to see what you're all going to do with all the different colours. The sky's the limit with this design and this is just a starting point. You can embellish this any way you like. You could also blow the pattern up and you could also bring it down and make a whole little village. It's super easy to make. You've got your free pattern in the drop down description box below. Just click the link where it says more and you'll find the link to your free pattern. You can print those pattern templates out on your own home printer. Now I've given you a big blurb there about printing, so if you shouldn't have any problems at all, have a read through that and make sure that you check your measuring bar that I put on every page of your pattern to make sure your pattern pieces are correct. And as always, all of my seam allowances are included in my patterns. So let's get started making a beautiful little toadstool house. Okay, so let's have a look at what we're going to need to put together our lovely little toadstool house. We are making this entire thing out of felt. Let's start with the actual base of the house. So let me move these off here. We've got our two felt pieces and they are interfaced with fusible woven cotton interfacing. It needs to be a woven interfacing, not that horrible man-made fiberglassy stuff. The woven cotton interfacing we use in soft sculpture because it stays nice and flexible. So all of your lovely rounded edges, when you're stuffing, you'll get that lovely, beautiful finish. So I'm using just a neutral kind of a base there. For the base of the toadstool, we're going to be covering the base with a circle of felt, which is also interfaced in the same colour. And you need a 75mm disc for the support of your base. Now, I'm using just a teddy bear jointing disc. If you've got one, 75mm, use that. If not, I'll give you that template and you can cut your own from mat board or very firm cardboard. It needs to be quite strong and flat because that's the main support for your toadstool house. We will also be adding a little bit of weight to the bottom. I'm using just some clean aquarium gravel. You could use glass beads, a little bit of coarse shell grit would do it, but it does just stabilise the base. This can be used as a pin cushion. It's a very big pin cushion, but still would be very useful. You could put everything in the top there. And for the top section, we're going to need our underside of our toadstool, which again is our interfaced felt. I've got some markings on there ready to do some stitching, and our two top pieces. Now they are also felt with that interfacing applied, and you can see I've already got cut out a whole heap of little circles in white with fusible webbing applied, so I can iron these on and stitch them on. You can alternatively use white buttons if you like, of all different sizes. Both will look good. I went for the felt because I like the idea of sewing around the edges of those and it will bevel them just a little and give that real sort of 3D look. So that's the top. This is really simple to put together. The reason why is because we're using a joint to join the top of the toadstool to the base. Now you might say, oh, you know, why would you use a joint? Why don't you just sew it on? Because here with my work, everything that I do is soft sculpture, and of course we work in masterclass and we use joints all the time. I use jointing for the simplest projects. Once you get used to using them, they're fantastic, and they can be used for joining things, not just for adding a limb. So that's why I'm showing you that today. If you're not familiar with joints, I've got two jointing videos. Have a look at those. And that will get you up to speed. So this joint is a 45mm joint. Okay, you'll need pearl thread for doing some of your decorative stitching. You'll need some clear craft glue, some polyester filling, and our little details for the front and the back of the actual main body of the toadstool. So I've got a little door. So you've got your door frame and you've got your door itself. They're going to be pressed on in felt. You could substitute these pieces with fabric. I just think that felt is, it gives a little bit more volume and it keeps the whole roundness to the project. So we've got the little window that goes just off centre here. I've given you a little pot with some flowers. This is similar to our cottage pincushion. And we're going to add a couple of little beads. We're going to do some machine embroidery to create some vines. You can add beads, all sorts of things. You can embellish these. All of you who love to do embroidery, you're going to love this project, and you can cover the whole base with it if you like. I will be adding a little additional window to the back, so that's optional. I've got some little leaves, some extra flowers there, and they're all cut. All of these pieces are cut from felt with fusible webbing applied, which means we can iron them on and then stitch them into place. So that's about it. We're going to start this whole project with working on the top of the toadstool. So these pieces here, I'm going to arrange them all. Now you have to remember that we're going to be sewing a seam around the base and we're going to be sewing a seam at the top. So don't have any of your pieces too close to the top. Also bear in mind that they're being sewn together there. So when you're placing your spots, be mindful of how that's going to marry up with the opposite side. So all I'm going to do is remove the backing papers off of those. I'll be taking this to my iron and using a hot iron and a protective cloth, I'm going to press those into place. Now the colours I'm using obviously are very strong fuchsia pink, rather than the classic red. I just wanted something a little bit different. But these toadstool houses can be made in any colours. In fact, you can go quite outrageous. You could go to the beautiful soft pastels. Whatever suits your decor and your vision, just go with that. So make a pleasing pattern, keep it random with these spots, press them into place. Then we're going to come back and we're going to sew them on. Once you have all of those spots pressed into place, you can go ahead and sew them on. Now, you can use a couple of different techniques to do this. I have blanket applique stitched all of mine in place, which is that lovely little finishing stitch around the edge of each. It gives it that gorgeous finish. You can take this to the machine and you can sew a nice close tiny little zigzag around each one. You could do a straight stitch right close to the edge, or alternatively you could hand stitch just a little stab back stitch around each one. I'm going to show you, I've done all of mine, I'm going to show you here on this one how to sew that blanket applique stitch. It's a little time consuming, but it's probably the best handmade finish. So I've got a single strand. I'm using extra strong thread. If you're using embroidery floss, use 2 strands. And I've got a knot in the end of a single strand and just come up from the base right on the edge of that circle there. I'm going to take up the fabric and the underside fabric and just bring it out, my needle out right on that edge, and I'm bringing my needle out through that thread loop. There we go. So move along the length of one stitch, keep them nice and small. Same thing, taking up both pieces of fabric, bringing it out right on that edge, needle coming out through the loop. I've got a full video on how to sew the blanket applique stitch. You can check that out if you wish. And the other thing I was going to say about these spots, when you are adding these spots to your toadstool, you'll notice that I'm using an off-white. I would never use stark white felt. In fact, I I rarely use it for anything in soft sculpture. Stark white felt it makes everything look cheap. So just an off-white, even a cream, an antique white will work so much better, and it will soften your project and it will make your project overall just look more expensive. So that's something to remember. The only time I ever use stark white felt is for very specific purposes, sometimes underneath glass eyes so we get lovely reflect, but otherwise leave the stark white felt alone is my advice. So I'm just going to continue on around that little shape all the way around till I meet up the opposite side. Now that I have all of my spots sewn in place, we're going to take these two pieces, we're going to put right sides together, making sure we're really matching up that top seam. You've got marks at the top there that you can line up on your pattern templates. Put a clip in there, and I'm going to overcast first that seam, and then I'm going to sew that seam 2 times, and the seam allowance is 4 millimeters. Do stay with that because of course your rest of your pattern has to all fit in together. Overall seam allowance for this pattern is 4 millimeters. So make sure when you do so that you go back and forth on your start and finish. So you can go ahead and roll out those seams, turn that one through, really roll those seams out, remove your overcasting stitch so that you can press the seam open and flat, and you can see that gives you a beautiful finish on the top, and we have to add the bottom to this, remember. So we want that gorgeous top of the seam. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the underside of this. So we will be sitting that one on there. This is the underside. We are first going to do some stitching on here. Now you've got a center mark. Just take your ruler and a heat erasable marker. So I've just used a black heat erasable marker here. It might be hard for you to see my lines on there. There they are. And I've just gone straight through the center and then across and continue to halve those as many times as I feel like would look good. So you can see how many times I've done it. I could have done more, but what I've done there I think is enough. What have I got? I've got 2, 4, 6, 8. So 8 little pie slivers, if that's what you want to call them. So now I'm going to take this to my machine and I'm going to be stitching over those lines with a contrasting thread. So because I'm using a dark colour, I'm going to use a contrasting thread, probably in something like a beige in my machine thread. I'm going to start stitching a little way out from the centre. We're going to be adding this with a joint, so we won't be seeing anything that's happening here. So by starting just a little way out from the centre, stitch out to the edge, pivot and stitch back in. So every line is sewn twice, leaving a space in the middle because we've got to add that hole through the centre. It takes a little bit of time again, but it's just on the machine. Sewing those twice really makes them stand out and give that lovely underside to our roof. There we go, so all my stitching done. Then I've taken this to the iron and I've given it a press and removed all of those marks. Of course, we still need that center mark, and we are going to take an awl and make that hole ready to go on our joint. So we've now got that lovely top and bottom to the toadstool to make our beautiful roof. We can put those aside now. We're going to start on the actual base of our toadstool house. Now on one of my pieces, which is my front piece, I have ruled, again in a heat erasable marker, a line straight across, which is 2 centimeters exactly, because the base of this we pull in around our wooden or your mat board base that you've done. So we don't want anything to sit below that line. So now we're going to take our pieces. We do all of our detailing before we put this together. It makes life so much easier. We're going to start with the frame of the door, which is going to go on. What you have to remember is we're sewing 2 side seams here. So you've got to think carefully about your placement. I'm going to move that to sit right on that line, and I also want it slightly off center. So I'm not putting it right in the middle. I'm going to take my paper off, and I will press these on one at a time. So I'll press this one on first, and then the door itself, which will leave just enough of that colour around it to create that frame. With these pieces, it's the window pieces, I want you to just take the very corners off. It will just give it a slightly softer look. That really does make all the difference. So again, this is the frame for our window, and that is going to sit just about off center again, the opposite way. I'm going to do the same with the window itself. Now I've cut mine, the inside of the window, in a bright yellow because it makes it look like the light is coming out of that window. But if you want to give it a look where it's dark in there, certainly use a darker colour felt for this. We will be stitching across to create that window pane crossed look. So I will press the base on first, and then again that one there. We will be adding, well, I will be adding, now this is, I've given you some pieces so you can play with those. I'm going to be adding a little pot plant with a couple of flowers and a little bit of foliage on here. We'll be sewing some stems. I'm also going to be sewing some ivy, creeping ivy up around here. You could do as much embellishment as you like, but I will give you the little flower template, the pot plant, some tiny leaves, and you can add whatever you like. I will be centering those flowers with a little bead. But for now, I only want to add the window and the door. And on the back, I'm going to do my other window. I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to trim those corners off. And I'm going to make sure that I'm placing the window on the opposite side. So it'll be on the opposite side of this one. So when you turn it around, it's over this side. So, and you can put that wherever you like. It can sit down lower, whatever you like. And I probably will settle mine down just a little bit lower. So get those all pressed into place, and then you can take it to your machine. So most of this work can be done on the machine. You can sew very close to the edge of each piece with a straight stitch, and make sure you go all the way around your pieces, one at a time. You can even just first add your first layer, stitch that in place, and then iron the second piece on and stitch that in place. Once we've done that, we're going to draw some lines in that door, again with our heat erasable marker, so we can do some wood paneling on that door. Very simple. Let me get them all pressed into place. So there you go. And now I have my windows pressed on and my doorway pressed on, and I've stitched around each of them independently with a nice straight stitch. I've got my stitch length set to a number 2 for this because it does give you a lovely close stitch. And I do encourage you to do these sections on the machine because you get such a clean finish. They're very straight lines, very easy to do. Of course you can, if you want to, hand sew them on with that same blanket applique stitch. Okay, so from there, I've gone ahead and drawn in the cross sections for those window panes using, again, my heat erasable marker. And I've done some 1/2 centimetre, starting at the centre, 1/2 centimetre lines to create some panelling in that door. The colours I'm going to be using are because I want my frame to stand out, I'm going to be using a darker brown that will work with the frame and look like it's all still part of that timber around the window on both of those. I will stitch 2 lines of stitching on those. I will increase my stitch length to 2.5 when I do that. I'll get better coverage. I'll do the same with the little door. So the door, I will be using just a much darker purple so that we get that indication of indentations. I will be using a tiny little mini button for the door handle, but you could use a bead or something like that. So let me get that stitching done, and then I will press them and remove those marks again. Okay, so that has all of my stitching done. You see how nicely segmented those window panes are now, and it looks lovely having that bit of woodwork in the door. So now I've taken it to my iron, removed all of those marks. My next step is to add my little flower pot, which I will line up exactly with the base of the door, because that's going to sit right on the edge as well. And you'll notice it's only probably about 6 millimeters from the door. I don't want it pulled over here. We're going to lose it in the seam and the curve if we do that. So keep it in nice and tight. You also want enough room to add your flowers. You don't have to add 2, I'm adding 2. But I'm not pressing the flowers on at this stage. I've just put them there so you can see where they're all going to fit together. So for now, I'm just going to press the pot in place, because then I want to do some green work going up to make stalks. And then while we're doing that, we're going to do some green work on the machine at the same time, which we will draw in with our heat erasable marker again. You can do some on the back as well if you like. Let me get the little pot pressed into place, and I'm going to do the same thing and just stitch around it so we've got a base to work from. So now I have the flower pot in place, so that's my good baseline and I can work around that. So what I've done is taken my heat erasable marker and I have just drawn in the stem lines. I haven't got these pressed into place yet, and I've done some foliage. Just don't be afraid of this. It's just about following the lines and going up around some little curves and splitting the ends of the twigs, and we're just going to sew over those lines on the machine in a green. I've done the same on the back, really coming up from the base. Where I've got these little circles, I'm just going to be adding just tiny little buttons in different colours. It's a quick and easy way to give the look of a flower. You could otherwise do lazy daisy stitch. I've certainly shown you lazy daisy stitch on our pram and one of our memory bears. Very easy stitch to do to add some little flowers. We will be adding the tiny little leaves as we go. So it really is, this is a creative process where you can do whatever you like. Alternatively, you could just add the flower pot, the 2 flowers, and you're done. So totally up to you, depending on what you want your finished product to look like. So I'm going to take some time now to do that green stitching. Once I've done it all, I can remove those marks with my iron. Then I can add my final pieces and stitch on those final little buttons before we actually put it together. Okay, so let's have a look at the progress that I've made working on my embroidery for the front and back of this little toadstool house. Now remember that everything from 2 centimeters down is not going to be seen. That's going to be tucked in, so that's your absolute base. So remember that when you're doing your stitching. Now you can see that I've gone ahead and used a few different greens and just absolutely randomly stitched some grasses in. And I've done the same on the back as well, remembering that 2 centimeters. So we're just going to get some foliage growing up from the base there. I've added a couple of felt leaves here, and also I've added my flowers. I've given you that template, and just stitched them star-wise in the middle and added a bead there. You can go ahead and add any tiny little embellishments. I've got some little tiny heart buttons there to indicate flowers, and you can do something as simple as just the little stitch with your pearl threads, your coloured threads, to make you know, like a little lavender plant or something like that. It doesn't need to be much, just to give a tiny indication of colour. As we go up higher, of course, those little buds at the top. So once it's put with all of these colours, it will look absolutely beautiful. Now, one other little trick that I'm going to show you, which makes it really sort of fairy tale little cottage, gives it some dimension. If you're doing the yellow in the windows like I am, you can really give it some definition by taking an ordinary polychromo pencil. So that's an ordinary pencil. It's not a watercolour pencil. You want to give a bit of shading around one side, so heavier on one side. Now, polychromo pencils work really well on felt, and you just want to basically rub it into the pile. So I'm using orange, and I'm creating a little shadow around one side and only doing a little bit of shading on the other, because there would naturally be more shading one side than the other. And now it looks like there's a fire on inside. It's lovely, warm, cozy fireplace happening, and it looks very warm and inviting. So you do the same thing here, and you can see just how easily it transfers. When you've done that, if you give that area just a little press, then you're going to really seal that pencil colour in, but you'll find that's very permanent. So just doing the same thing, focusing on more colour one side than the other, and just a little bit to frame up around the outside here. Just really brings it to life. And that's about it for all of my detailing. You certainly could add more. The other thing you have to watch is, remember, we're sewing a seam, a 4mm seam here and here, and you'll notice that I've kept everything away from that seam on both sides, so that's not going to interfere with anything. I'm going to finish colouring that up, and then I'm simply going to start our construction, which is putting right sides together, and we're going to line that up beautifully. We're going to overcast first, and then we're going to stitch 2 times. We're going to stitch that 4mm seam allowance just down each side. So you can go ahead and turn that one through once you've sewn your side seams. It's really important to take the time to roll out those seams between your thumb and fingers so that we get that lovely rounded curve on both sides. Then your next step is to take a doubled strand of extra strong thread, and you're going to sew a running stitch around the top edge. Leave your tail ends hanging so that we can tie it off, which I've done there. I've made my first knot, and it's only about 3mm in from the edge. You can pull that knot in a little. Now we're going to take the top part of our joint, which has the bolt glued to the disc, and we are going to take that up through the centre, and we want to pull that bolt out through the middle. And we want that to be centred beautifully. We're going to tie off around that bolt. Make sure it's pushed up, make sure that it's beautifully centred. Once we start adding filling, we'll be able to push that right up. And you're going to knot that off at least 4 times, tight around that bolt before snipping those thread ends. Our next step, once you've got that joint nicely in place, do make sure that it is pulled up. We are going to start filling. Now you will be stuffing with polyester filling, and you will be stuffing it very firm. Use forceps if you have them. I will be filling to about halfway or just over halfway. Then I will be adding a couple of scoops of my aquarium gravel that's going to give it some weight on the base, and then I will top it off with a little bit more filling. You want to finish filling around about 2 centimetres from the edge here, so where your line is where this door starts, because this section is going to be pulled in around our base. But this needs to be packed really super firm, and the weight of that aquarium gravel, whatever you're using, is going to help do that. You certainly use your wool felting needle as you go if you've got one, and that will help you pack that filling in. Now once you have your little base stuffed nice and firm, which I have here, I've gone ahead and added just a couple of scoops of that aquarium gravel, and that's in there, and then I've just covered that aquarium gravel with another little bit of polyester filling. I've been pushing it and packing it all down as I go. Then you take your base disc, whether you're using a wooden one or whether you've cut one from mat board. I meant to say at the beginning, if you cut one from mat board, cut two of them and glue them together with PVA glue, and it will make it really strong, just as strong as your wooden disc would be. So now I've sewn that same running stitch that we did around the neck, around the base, and when you add this base, you'll find that it'll push everything down and it'll firm everything up, but it does need to be quite firm. So now I can pull on those thread ends. I'm going to make sure that it's all sitting straight and balanced. This is being pulled in evenly, and you want to pull on those thread ends until the door sits level with your base and the pot sits level with the base. So that's where you know where you need to pull it into, and give it a squeeze and push it in, and it will come in till everything's nice and level. When you've done that, go ahead and knot that off again at least 4 times before snipping those thread ends. I've still got my needle on, so I can probably go around another time too, just to make sure it's really, really secure. So there we go, that has that base set in, pulled in, and sitting nice and flush with the bottom of the door and that little pot plant. Beautiful little base there. So next, just take your covering felt circle and coat it well with clear craft glue. I might just add a little bit more there. And we're going to cover that base because it gives it a lovely professional finish, especially if you're selling these items. And we will be sewing a blanket applique stitch around that once it's dry. So it's quite liberally coated with my glue. It's just clear craft glue, and then position that exactly over that base. Check it from every angle. That will be the perfect fit. You can stand it up on itself, press that down and let that dry completely. We're going to come back when that's dry and sew that blanket applique stitch all the way around the base, which is super easy to do, but it needs to be perfectly dry to do that. So now we can start working. While we're waiting for that to dry, we're going to start working on sewing our roof together. So let's have a look at putting this top and base together. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to be sewing with a pearl thread. Mine is 8 ply. You can use 5 ply. In fact, 5 ply is probably better, but I'm using 8 ply because I'm going to do a beaded blanket stitch. I'm going to be adding little white beads to my stitch as I go around, which is going to give a lovely little rim to the finished top. Of course, you don't have to do that, and blanket stitch is just, it's the same as doing a blanket stitch, except for you add a bead in the middle, and I'll show you as I go. If you are not adding the beads and you're worried about white core showing, white core meaning the interfacing, you're going to be sewing together those 2 layers like that. If you want to get rid of that white core, simply take a felt marker that works with your colour scheme and you can colour up that white core. Then once you sew over it, it will be completely and totally invisible. I won't need to do that because of my beads. They should hide everything. So choose the section, the side that you want to be front facing. So then start work at the back. So first of all, I'm just going to clip, making sure this seam is open and flat. I'm going to clip them at the side. You'll find this should line up and fit perfectly, this base circle. I'm going to do the same thing, the other side. Clip that into place. And I'm going to start somewhere on the opposite side. We're going to have to leave an opening where we're going to be able to joint it to the top of the base. So I'm going to start just somewhere here. So I've got my thread ready, single strand. I'm going to come in between the layers. So coming in between the layers of the felt, and then I'm going to make sure that everything is still lined up here. And I'm going to make my first stitch. My stitches are probably about 4 millimeters deep. Make sure I'm going through the thread loop and anchor in that first stitch. Now for me, my next step is to take one of my beads. So I'm just using a white pearl bead. Take that down, hold that bead in place there, and make my stitches just wide enough to accommodate that bead. And we just carry on. And while there would normally be that thread that sits across there, instead the thread is going through a bead that sits across there. So before I do the next stitch, I've got to add another bead. And yes, this does take a while, but if you've seen this done, it's a beautiful stitch. I've actually got a video that shows you this stitch, doing it on its own. So again, bead in place, making my stitches just large enough to accommodate those beads, and you'll find that they're going to nestle in next to each other nice and tight. Next bead on every time before I make my stitch. It's just a really easy way to decorate an edge. So you can see just how well they're sitting there on that edge. Totally will transform the top edge of this little roof. So I'm going to continue on all the way around, and I'm going to leave a space that is probably, I'll give you an estimate, it's probably about 8 to 9 centimetres. Leave an opening. So you'll finish here, but when you get to here, leave your needle and thread on, because we're going to joint it and then we're going to stuff it and continue closing. So I have made my way all the way around that top piece, adding my beads as I go, and I have left that section open, and I've just left my needle in place, and you can see what I mean about that beaded effect. It's just lovely, adds a beautiful little rim. So we can pop that one aside because we need to go back and stitch around the base of the stump. I have a matching thread to my felt colour, and I've just got a single strand, not in the end, and this is a pearl thread, and it is a 8 ply. So I'm just going to come in on the underside here, bring my needle through. My knot can sit in there between those layers, and I'm going to sew a blanket applique stitch. So it's the same as a blanket applique stitch, only we're doing it on a 3D situation here. So I'm just going to take my needle in and take up some of that underside layer of the body as well, and just as we do with blanket stitch, we're going to make sure that then our needle is going through the thread loop. Pull that in nice and snug. Move a bit further along, and again each time catching both that circle and some of that fabric of the stump there, pulling that in nice and tight. That's going to bring those two edges together and give it the most professional finish. You can see there we're going to have that little line following all the way around. So that's all I'm going to do, continue on until I get back to my start. So that base is now completely done. You can see how nice that stitch finishes off that base there. So now we're going to add the top to the base. We've got the hole already made through here that you should have made with your awl, and we've got room, of course, to be able to reach in there. Now, normally when you're working with joints, both your discs are the same. Of course they are. But this is just an extra tip. Now certainly most of you will just use your joint just as it is with the same size disc. Probably this is more for my masterclass people who have probably a larger assortment of wooden discs. You can up the size of the one that goes on top. What that will do is it will settle the top of the toadstool just a little lower, and then it will fan out from there. If you're using the same size disc, it'll be just as lovely. It's more that it will pull up. So totally up to you which one you use, and I'm adding a 60mm disc on top. So I'm going to find that hole to pop it through, pop that bolt through. A bit hard for you to see in there. There it is, and I'm going to go ahead and make sure I really pulled down that fabric all the way around. I'm going to slip my 60mm disc in there and add that. Make sure nothing's caught up there, and then I'm going to add my washer and that nut. Just finger tighten that for now and just check that I have got everything, nothing's caught up. And the disc doesn't need to, we're not using a joint for movement, we're using a joint just for connection. I'm going to pull this around to the back because I like this at the front. So now I can reach in there and tighten up that nut with my spanner. Tighten that up nice and tight. Then I will take one little drop of super glue and add it into the threads of that bolt right where the nut sits. That will stop that nut ever coming away. Okay, so that has the top joined beautifully. You can see the underside there, and now we can start to fill that top section of the mushroom. Now if you're going to be using this as perhaps a pin cushion, you're going to need to fill it firm enough that it will hold itself, and we also need to make sure that we fill out our lovely top curve. The more you fill it, the more upright it will sit. I'm going to take my forceps and just fill all the way around the rim without overdoing it. As you fill, you'll see that that little top, you can manipulate the shape of that roof, and you can give it a little pull up on one side at the front if you like. You can see how it naturally curves up and down. It's really nice to pull up the edges and you see that underside, and you can determine where that happens by stuffing. So I won't be using mine as a pin cushion, so I won't be packing that super firm. I want to keep some shape in it, but it's really important still to add enough filling in there that all of these lovely curves are filled out. Fill that up until you're happy with that. You can still get in there with your wool felting needle and pack it in. And once you have it exactly where you want it, you've still got your needle and thread on, then you just continue along and close that opening. And so that, my friends, is our finished little beautiful toadstool fairy house, and I absolutely have loved making this one. Now I'm very excited to see what you're all going to do with your colours. They are very addictive, and as you can see, very quick and easy to put together, and there's no limit to how you can decorate this. So you can see that little pull up on the sides showing the underside there, beautiful at the back as well. So many fun things you could do here. I'm really excited to see your colours, and you can see I've packed mine quite firm on top. It could definitely be a pin cushion, and that's just lifted that right out there, but you can see that they will display really well on a shelf, and they do look better if you're coming right down at their level. So up on a slightly an eye level shelf or a little bit higher, and you'll see all of that beautiful underside as well. I just absolutely love it. Would love to make a million of them. And you could also reduce this pattern down. If you do that, make sure that you also reduce the size of your disc as well. So just trace around it and bring that pattern down. Alternatively, you could increase it and make a whole village of these little guys. So I really have had fun with it. I hope you do too. Thank you so much for joining me. So much fun with this one. I hope you've enjoyed seeing it. As you saw, it's really quick and easy to put together. Everybody jump on our Facebook page. I'll put the links down below and share all of your beautiful colours. And I would love to see some of them made smaller and some of them made bigger. So I'm really excited to see those results. Come and join us on our Facebook page and you can share any of your creations that you make using my patterns. Thank you everybody for joining me for Masterclass launch. I hope you've all enjoyed seeing my beautiful robin, and if you want to join Masterclass, I'll put that link down below there as well. Looking forward to a creative week ahead, everyone. I've got lots of things in store. Excited to be going live with you all really soon. So getting organised to do that and introducing you to my daughters when we do that. That's going to be a whole lot of fun. So a whole lot of creative fun. So everybody have a fantastic creative week, won't you? And make sure that you pay all of those good things forward. Until next time, it is hooroo from me.